Germany's coordinator of transatlantic cooperation says the new Cold War between the U.S. and China has begun, and Europe should work together with the U.S. The U.S. is reportedly hitting China's biggest chipmaker with sanctions. An expert says the move could be crippling to China's semiconductor industry. China's foreign affairs spokesman praised 4 new inventions of China, but none of them are originally from China. An international organization stopped referring to Taiwanese cities as part of China. It's a rare win for Taiwan. And in another rare move, it was the European Union that helped Taiwan achieve it. And Germany has been criticized for its relatively soft stance on Beijing's aggression lately. We explore whether the German car industry's reliance on the Chinese market has a role in it. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. First, we turn to 40,000 displaced immigrants in central China. They were forced off of their land when authorities decided to construct a reservoir in the area. The land now remains occupied by the local government, who have provided little to no compensation in exchange. Some of those displaced, dubbed reservoir immigrants, still can't settle down over 10 years later.
Zhao City Reservoir is located in southern China on the major tributary of the biggest freshwater system, Dongting, in China. Some reservoir immigrants from the city told us that the local government is occupying the land of 40,000 immigrants. The reservoir project started in 2004 without any official documents. The farmers got very little to zero compensation for the loss of their farmlands and houses, without any resettlement plans from authorities. It made their lives extremely difficult. In the past decade, local farmers held protests, appealed to authorities of different levels, and issued petitions to defend their rights. But their voices went unheard. Instead, some petitioners were arrested and sentenced to imprisonment. Mr. Chen has been to Beijing to petition the central government 10 times, to no avail.
The local government occupies the land of farmers without giving any compensation. Rather, they sell the land at a high price and make a huge amount of money for corrupt officials. Meanwhile, they control people, blocking any means for them to speak out. They stop petitioners on their way to Beijing and imprison those who did go. They imprisoned 5 villagers in 2016, and 2 or 3 of them are still in prison.
Another reservoir immigrant, Mr. Yen, was a local businessman. He told us the authorities seized his shop while giving him very little compensation. After the reservoir had been built, his shop had not been impacted by the build. The authorities then sold his shop and got a huge amount of money.
After moving out, we had to rely on friends and relatives. With our own savings, we built a house. Then there was no money left. Our hands were empty. As we had moved to a new place, we had no customers and could not do business anymore.
An accusation settlement from another reservoir immigration victim, Mr. Chin, is still online. He made it clear that the immigration in his village started in 2007, but the compensation rates were those from a decade ago and were very low. He refused it and demanded fair treatment by authorities. During a 4-year wait for a solution, the authorities only sought to speak with him in the first year. Then, after 3 years of no response, authorities suddenly closed the floodgates of the reservoir in 2011. His house and the ones of his neighbors were flooded without any warning. All his belongings were destroyed. Reporting by Xu Wenhui, NTD News.
China's Urban Administrative and Law Enforcement Bureau, commonly known as Chengguan, have started to protest for their rights. It comes in contrast to the kind of attention Chengguan usually gather, often making it into the spotlight over their violent law enforcement style. The group isn't considered a police force, but exercises the same powers. They're tied to abuses of power, frequently seen robbing shops, harassing peddlers, and confiscating their merchandise. But this time, the group is standing up for themselves. A recent video posted online showed a group of Chengguan gathering in front of Maoming City's municipal building in Guangdong province. They were seen holding a banner demanding that they receive the benefits they were promised. Typically, protests in China held to defend people's rights receive sympathy from netizens, but the Chengguan protests have received very little. One netizen commented on the video saying, "Show the same courage as when you violently rob shops and peddlers and use this courage to break into the municipal building. That's the victory of defending your rights." Another netizen wrote, "The Stability Maintenance Force now becomes the Stability Maintenance Target. There will be more and more of this kind of thing on every level from now on." Now we take a look at what a spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Chinese Communist Party said about the technological development in China. Zhao Lijian retweeted on Saturday, "Bicycle sharing, high-speed rail, mobile payment, and e-commerce are the 4 new inventions of China." His tweet triggered heated discussion among netizens. The names of the 4 technologies appeared for the first time in a survey conducted by Beijing Foreign Studies University in 2017. The survey asked young people from 20 different countries to list the technologies they most want to bring to their home country from China. And the 4 with the highest votes were bicycle sharing, high-speed rail, mobile payment, and e-commerce. After that, the Chinese authorities and official media invented a new term about the survey: 4 new inventions, changing 4 popular technologies in China to 4 major innovations and using this so-called immense success to praise the Chinese Communist Party. According to the analysis of netizens, none of the 4 inventions were from China. The concept of shared bicycles actually originated in the Netherlands in the 60s. The high-speed rail technology came from Germany and was first in operation in the 60s in Japan. The first high-speed rail in China did not open until 2009. Mobile payment was first used in the U.S. at the end of the last century, and e-commerce actually cannot be considered an invention. It refers to electronically buying or selling products over the internet having been born in the United States. The tweet by Zhao Lijian triggered heated discussion online. One netizen posted his version of the 4 new inventions. Used oil that is later collected illegally and reused again, contaminated baby formula, fake vaccines, and novel pneumonia, referring to the CCP virus. White House National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien says the Chinese regime's next target is Taiwan. He told the Washington Times after Beijing's actions on Hong Kong, he's worried about Taiwan. O'Brien said Beijing, imposing the draconian national security law on Hong Kong, stripped the financial hub of its democratic system, adding Beijing will now increase pressure on gaining regional control over Taiwan. Beijing claims the island as sovereign Chinese territory, but Taiwan has not considered itself to be part of the regime for 70 years. The Chinese regime has recently ramped up military activity around the island, carrying out large-scale air and naval exercises off of Taiwan's southwest and in its air defense identification zone. The U.S., Japan, and Canada, meanwhile, announced joint military and naval exercises starting late October in the islands around Japan. Called Keen Sword, the exercises provide bilateral field training to increase combat readiness. With the help of the European Union, an international organization has stopped referring to Taiwanese cities as part of China. It's considered a rare win for Taiwan amid growing pressure from Beijing. The Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy has removed 6 Taiwanese cities from the China category. It also reverted to the city's original designation as being part of Chinese Taipei. That's according to a Monday announcement from Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Chinese Communist regime is ramping up efforts to get international groups and companies to refer to Taiwan as being part of China on their websites and in official documents. Taipei is Taiwan's capital city, and Chinese Taipei is a name Taiwan uses in some international bodies like the Olympics. It helps avoid objections from Beijing about the island's participation. Taiwan expressed gratitude for the European Union's help in pushing the name correction, though it didn't detail what kind of help was given. For now, no European Union country has formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan. The EU often keeps a low profile when it comes to the Taiwan issue to avoid Beijing's aggression. China is the European Union's second largest trading partner. China is holding new military exercises in the South China Sea. U.S. Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus noted on Sunday that Chinese leader Xi Jinping made a statement 5 years ago related to the Spratly Islands during his U.S. visit. Xi promised China does not intend to pursue militarization of the Spratly Islands and said that China's outposts would not target or impact any country. The Spratly Islands are one of the major disputed outposts in the South China Sea. Morgan Ortagus added China has instead pursued a reckless and provocative militarization of those disputed outposts. She added China's Communist Party does not honor its words or commitments, and China uses these militarized outposts as platforms of coercion to assert control over waters to which Beijing has no lawful maritime claim. She pointed out that these militarized outposts serve as staging grounds for the hundreds of maritime militia vessels and China Coast Guard ships that regularly harass civilian craft and impede legitimate law enforcement activities, offshore fishing, and hydrocarbon development by neighboring states. The United States has blocked American firms from doing business with China's biggest chipmaker, SMIC. It's over concerns the company has connections with the Chinese military.
The Commerce Department has told U.S. chip companies to stop supplying China's biggest chipmaker, SMIC. U.S. firms will now need to get a government export license if they want to sell certain technology to SMIC. In a letter to U.S. chipmakers, the Commerce Department said selling chips to SMIC poses an unacceptable risk of being diverted to military end use in China. Shares in the company dropped as much as 8% as of Monday morning. Investors have seen a 25% drop in the company's shares over the last month. The trend could continue as the potential for the company to be put on the entity blacklist looms. The move is already a big blow for China. The government has heavily invested in their semiconductor industry to become self-reliant and compete globally. However, that journey to self-reliance requires a long-term approach, and U.S. companies currently hold innovations that lead the industry. An SMIC engineer told the Financial Times that people in the industry are more pessimistic about becoming self-sufficient and that they feel helpless. The recent restrictions on Huawei meant that SMIC lost sales that accounted for a fifth of its revenue. And the new sanctions mean that its second biggest customer after Huawei, Qualcomm, will need to be curtailed. SMIC said it didn't receive any notice and that it has no relationship with the Chinese military.
The U.S. is reportedly restricting tech export to China's biggest chipmaker. If the move is real, an expert says China's entire domestic semiconductor industry could suffer a devastating blow. NTD's Juliet Song has more on that.
China's biggest chipmaker, SMIC, could soon be hit by U.S. sanctions. According to a Wall Street Journal report, the Commerce Department has asked computer chip companies to first get licenses if they want to sell technology to SMIC. Our in-house expert says if sanctions are imposed, they would cause a devastating blow to China's domestic semiconductor industry.
The sanctions don't just cripple one part of China's chip industry. They cut off all of the industry's critical components. It's a comprehensive penalty.
Semiconductors or chips are the brains of modern electronic devices. They power everything from smartphones to computers to military applications like missiles. And when it comes to high-end chips, China is highly reliant on imports, toppling the list of the world's largest chip importers. In 2019, China imported $300 billion worth of chips. That's more than what it spent on crude oil. The Chinese regime has been pushing for self-sufficiency, pouring top-dollar funding into its domestic chip industry. And SMIC leads the country's tech breakthroughs. But it's now facing mounting difficulties. As U.S. technologies dominate the chip industry, the U.S. technology lead comes down to all parts of chip production: design, manufacturing, package fabrication, and testing.
No matter what segment of chip production you're talking about, U.S. technologies are involved. So companies that use U.S. technology could be forced to observe the sanctions.
U.S. chip companies lead global chip design, and they make up almost half of the global market share. When it comes to chip manufacturing, China's technology lags far behind. The world's top chip maker, Taiwan's TSMC, can produce chips as small as 5 nanometers. China's strongest competitor, SMIC, can at best produce 14 nanometer chips. And to make the world's most advanced chips, manufacturers have to use an EUV machine. Dutch company ASML is the only one in the world that makes it, but even that uses U.S. technology. The Chinese regime tried to create its own EUV machine twice already, but failed. Juliet Song, NTD News.
A judge has blocked the ban on TikTok downloads in the United States for now. The Trump administration's ban was supposed to take effect at midnight on Sunday. The Commerce Department says it will comply with the ruling, but it will defend the president's executive order from legal challenges. President Trump ordered TikTok owner ByteDance to sell its U.S. assets. He's given initial approval for a proposed deal with Oracle and Walmart. They would own a 20% share of TikTok Global. But he said he could object if Oracle doesn't have total control of the company. Germany's coordinator of transatlantic corporations, Peter Bayer, says Europe and the U.S. need to work together against the growing challenges from China. He said in an interview with AFP, the new Cold War between the United States and China has already begun and will shape this century. With the U.S. elections fast approaching, Bayer noted common interests between Americans and Europeans, particularly when it comes to China or Iran. He said Europe has to cooperate with the U.S. to face the challenges China poses. He also said it's no secret transatlantic relations would be easier under a Biden administration, citing the strain between German Chancellor Angela Merkel and President Trump on a number of issues ranging from trade, NATO, to Iran and the climate. But he said another 4 years of Trump wouldn't necessarily usher in a collapse of the West either. Despite the differences between the two countries, Bayer pointed to the decades of post-war cooperation between the two. He added it's important to remember America taught them the values of freedom and democracy, for which they are thankful. Now we turn to the auto industry. In part 1 of this special report, we start to explore the relationship between China and Germany's car industry. China is the world's biggest car market, and the auto industry stands as Germany's economic champion, creating and supporting millions of jobs. But the ties between the two have come under scrutiny from German media. That's as Beijing steps up its use of economic measures to silence other countries' critics of its human rights abuses. Last year, China's ambassador to Germany threatened to hit Germany's car industry if the country excluded Huawei from its market. Now we look to the historical reasons why Beijing thought the threat would work. On June 4, 1989, Beijing shocked the world by sending tanks into Tiananmen Square. There, Chinese military massacred thousands of unarmed students participating in a hunger strike. They had gathered to ask for democracy and a more open society. Western democracies announced economic sanctions against China soon after the attack, for fear that their investment would go toward funding suppression. But those concerns seemed to fall on deaf ears as far as Germany's car manufacturers were concerned. In July of 1989, a month after the bloodshed, Volkswagen announced it will expand productions in its joint venture with state-owned enterprises in Shanghai. And over a year later, in 1990, Volkswagen established another joint venture with a Chinese state-owned company in northeastern China. The short-lived resolution to punish Beijing also spilled over to the political world. German reporter Andreas Lorenz, who was in Beijing during the massacre, recounted in a column later, "We journalists observed with horror how foreign governments, including the German, wanted to normalize relations with the Chinese leadership soon after June 4th. Ex-Chancellor Helmut Schmidt flew to China in 1990, followed by a large delegation of politicians in 1993. Human rights law expert Sharon Holm said in an interview with a German newspaper that the Chinese party state has learned the lesson from 1989. It can get away with murder. 10 years later, another major humanitarian crisis struck mainland China in July 1999. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, launched a persecution campaign against the spiritual group Falun Gong. Fearful of the group's rapid popularity growth among Chinese people. Since then, thousands have died from the persecution, and hundreds of thousands have been subject to harassment, imprisonment, and torture. Also in 1999, Volkswagen's joint venture in Changchun held a grand ceremony celebrating the rollout of its A6 production line. The event hosted CCP leaders and hundreds of journalists. Several executives also became honorary citizens of Changchun City, one of the regions that suffered most from Beijing's religious persecution campaign. In a 2006 open letter to the then Volkswagen CEO, a former engineer of the carmaker's joint venture in Changchun alleged that from 2000 to 2003, at least 10 Falun Gong practitioners were dismissed by the joint venture for practicing Falun Gong. The former staff requested an investigation, which didn't happen. And in 2008, as the world criticized the CCP's suppression of Tibet, Volkswagen sponsored Beijing's Olympic Games. In 2012, Volkswagen established a factory in China's remote region of Xinjiang. An article by South German newspaper last year called the plant economically unprofitable and the most useless and by far the most political production that the Wolfsburg-based company maintains. According to the South German newspaper, when a German Green Party member visited Xinjiang and spoke with several Uyghur employees about human rights issues, Chinese authorities temporarily arrested the Volkswagen representative in Xinjiang. And then came the famous exchange between a BBC reporter and Volkswagen's chief executive. The reporter questioned the company's investment in Xinjiang.
You don't know about China's re-education camps for 1 million Uyghur people. You don't know about that.
I'm not aware of that.
The CEO later said he was aware of the situation. And finally, this year, Germany's car industry continues to suffer amid the pandemic. It endured production losses from its supply chain, which is mainly stationed in China, as well as car sales losses due to a steep drop-off in demand from China, its largest market. But even still, in an interview with Chinese state media this May, an industry expert who was dubbed the godfather of Germany's car industry objected to retracting supply chains from China. He stated that to decouple with China is to choose failure and the biggest mistake car makers could possibly make. Last week, we reported on a Chinese virologist saying that there will be a second wave of the CCP virus in China this winter. He also said that a large percentage of the cases will be asymptomatic, adding this would lead to horrible results. Some viewers said that asymptomatic cases, people are not sick, so there should not be a big problem. While it is true that these people do not show many symptoms, the problem lies in that they could spread the virus more easily because they don't stay at home to self-quarantine like people showing symptoms usually do. Other people who come in contact with them won't realize they have been around someone infected with the CCP virus. If predictions hold true and there is an influx of asymptomatic cases within the second wave in China, it would mean that there could be significant trouble in controlling the spread of the virus this time around. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.